Hey there, guys. Once again, we do the Fango Tango here on Retro Newsstand with Fangoria issue fucking 3. I know it's been a while since we did one of these. We're kind of on schedule with how we would be receiving the shit if it was actually being published. But they're not, and I have no excuse. So I'm going to go ahead and try to up the output over this Halloween season. Going to hit you with an issue of Fango, followed by a movie review, and possibly an issue of Gore Zone tonight as well. Depends on how drunk I get. So here's to it, guys. Going to try to knock this one down in a nice, timely fashion. Issue number 3 was published in December of 1979. We got Christopher Lee in Arabian Adventure as the cover feature. We also have ads for a Kolchak the Night Stalker episode guide, a preview of the new David Cronenberg film The Brood, of course fantastic art, Jack Arnold, Tales of the Unexpected, and Richard Matheson Part 2. Flipping to the contents page, we see we have a total of 14 segments, not counting the classified ads, the first of which is the welcome letter written by the editor emeritus of Fangoria, Joe Bonham, and it is entitled In Search of Fun. Basically, it's an indictment of people just being whiny bitches about their movie fandom and the fact that just having fun with a movie, whether it be good or bad, is kind of lost on people. I highly recommend reading it because it is just kind of staggering the parallels you could draw between this and what movie fandom has evolved into in modern times. Fangoria had their finger on the pulse of it for sure, and they knew that it was going down a bad road, and they wanted to do everything they could to keep the fun aspect of these movies intact. Anyway, moving on, after that, of course, we have the Postal Zone. I've been debating whether to do these first or last, but it's just easier to get them out of the way so I don't forget about them. Pretty much all of the write-ins in this issue's Postal Zone are from issue number 1, or regarding issue number 1, so they were sent in during the month that issue number 2 was out. And most of them are praising the shit that I praised in my video, the Tom Savini article, the Godzilla stuff. There seems to be overwhelming demand for more Japanese monster movies being covered and more Japanese superheroes like Ultraman and shit being covered. Also people requesting stuff from the Japanese cartoons of the time like giant robots and shit like that. So that was pretty interesting, and Fangoria seemed pretty open to those ideas. Probably my favorite tidbits from the Postal Zone are the advertisement for the costume parade thing that they were doing, where you could send in photos of yourself in your Halloween costume from that year, and they would publish the best photos. Second favorite would definitely be the guy that calls Fangoria the fuck out on their response to the dude about the Star Wars question regarding the dog fights in issue number 1. They kind of fucked up answering that right in at the time. I pointed that out in my video, and this guy basically calls them out on their inaccuracy there, pointing out some direct dialogue that was lifted in Star Wars from this movie called Dam Busters, so it was nice to see that come full circle. Also, according to them, this is the first issue where they expanded the Postal Zone to 2 pages. Honestly, I felt like the Postal Zone in last issue was 2 pages, but I'm probably wrong. After that, we have our cover article, which is a brief little 2-page feature on Arabian Adventure, starring Christopher Lee, or featuring Christopher Lee as the villain. We get a nice little tidbit where Christopher Lee shoots down the idea that he's being typecast by being cast as this villain. He explains that he's had tons of interesting roles since his heroic role in Airport 77, and he mainly took this role in Arabian Adventure because it just sounded like it would be fun, and he thought kids would enjoy his portrayal of the villain. We learn that it's got some good special effects, though some of them are frustratingly bad, though the good footage does vastly outweigh the bad stuff. We learn that there is some dope matte painting involved, some sick miniatures, and an epic flying carpet battle at the end of the movie. Overall, this was a really well-written article. It's a shame that I can't give credit to the author, because Fangoria wasn't tagging all the authors in the articles yet at this point, so that's kind of a bummer. But it definitely got me stoked to look into this. I've never seen this movie, and just based on the flying carpet battle alone, it seems like something I should see. That can only be awesome, even if it turns out totally cheesy. After that, we arrive at a nice little 3-page feature on The Brood, which was the current David Cronenberg film coming out at the time. This is one of our cover articles. Should have been the cover article, in my opinion. Basically, it's more about him just running down his experience with making horror films, why he's drawn to the sort of unique body horror element that he puts into his shit. He cracks on Alien a little bit, saying it's kind of basically just a dude in a crocodile suit chasing people around, and they didn't really do anything cool with it. You can really tell that comes more out of the fact that people compared the parasite in his movie Shivers to the parasite parasite in Alien and it bugged him. That type of crap aside, it's a really nice article. If you haven't seen his previous movies before The Brood at this point, it gives you a rundown of each of them up to and including The Brood, which is just an insane movie. I can't recommend it enough. Basic gist of it is this lady is like insane and she's all into these psychology fads, you know, and she checks herself into this retreat under the care of this doctor dude who's experimenting with making people manifest their psychological problems physically through their bodies in an attempt to cure them. Unfortunately with this bitch, it goes off the fucking rails. She starts giving birth to these murderous little children. There's a part where she fucking licks the baby after it comes out of this fetus sack that's fucking growing off of her stomach on the outside. They actually show a picture of it right in the article, which I can't believe they did. And it's just awesome. You know, it's just a great movie. So we get pretty much everything you would want in a brief sit down with David Cronenberg at this point in his career. He gives hints that he wants to make his next film with a major fucking studio so he doesn't have to deal with distribution problems, which he has dealt with on all of his films up to The Brood. I guess it was only booked for 1 week in Los Angeles, no matter how good it did. So a lot of people down here in the States didn't really get to see very much of it or see it at all. And so I imagine this article did a fair amount to raise awareness of a really classic gem in horror cinema. The Brood definitely deserves it. Check it out. Fun fact, when I was a kid, I think I was like 12, my mom actually bought me The Brood and the first Evil Dead movie for my birthday. And I'm not gonna lie, that fetus scene fucked me up a little bit. After that, we get part 2 of the Richard Matheson feature started in Fangoria issue 2, written by Paul Salmon. It's covering the television films of Richard Matheson, and it talks about his filmography and stuff. Basically, it concludes what we started in the last issue. If you guys want to know more about that, go ahead and check out that video if you haven't. Basically, he's like an author dude that did a bunch of screenplays for a bunch of awesome fucking movies. Between this article and the first one, you should be intimately familiar with this guy's body of work by the time you're done with him, and it's certainly given me a good list of stuff to check out that I haven't peeped before. As I said in the last episode, it was already a treat just finding out that he was the author of one of my favorite horror short stories of all time, one that fucking scarred me as a kid and still creeps me out pretty good to this day. I actually read it again after I did that episode on issue 2, and it holds up. Just a cool feature. I don't know that we really needed it split between 2 issues. I'm sure they did that just because it turned out kind of lengthy and they didn't want to pack all of it into 1 issue, thus leaving less room for other features. Makes sense, but I would have liked to have gotten it out of the way. Not that it wasn't fun, it's just it, you know, being split into 2 different issues just felt like it got a little bit more time than it maybe deserved. After that, we have a pretty lengthy feature called Creatures Great and Small, the science fiction films of Jack Arnold, wherein we learn about old Jack, who we encountered in issue number 1 as the director of Creature of the Black Lagoon. He talks about how he basically bullshitted his way into studio work by pretending to be some expert at directing science fiction films, even though he wasn't. He talks about how he kind of perfected different techniques and how he made some of his movies up to this point where they're interviewing him here. The most coverage we get is on Creature from the Black Lagoon 2, or Revenge of the Creature, I believe it's called. He talks a bit about how they had to shoot this scene in a shark tank down in Florida, and he asked the people to take the sharks out. They ended up not doing that, so he was forced to basically get in the water with the sharks to show the cast members that it was totally safe. You know, they were well fed, so they weren't going to attack them or anything. We learn about how a guy almost got fucking killed on the set of Tarantula, which was a movie he did after that when Universal needed some more exploitation film style stuff. And we get some really fascinating tidbits about kind of the development of what would eventually be green screen technology. They did it on the movie The Incredible Shrinking Man before even blue screen was a thing. So they basically had to go through all this whole crazy mathematical process of shooting the fucking film of the spider that they were trying to use in one scene, for example, and timing it perfectly with the dude on the miniature sets. It's impossible for me to explain it because I'm still not really sure I grasp it myself, but it was fascinating to hear about how they had to work these problems out before there was even technology that could just allow them to do it the way that we all come to expect nowadays. After that, as sort of a companion piece, we get a brief sort of interview with Ray Bradbury and Jack Arnold concerning Jack Arnold's It Came from Outer Space, which is a film adaptation of a short story that Ray Bradbury wrote for Universal as a treatment for a new science fiction film. Bradbury talks a bit about how he had to kind of struggle with the studio to get his treatment passed through as the final version, though they did not let him do the screenplay because it was his first job for a film studio. Jack Arnold talks about making the movie a little bit, how they went about designing the creature, even though he didn't even want to show the creature, but Universal was pretty insistent on it. Bradbury agrees with him that they should have left the mystery there and not showed the creature. Outside of that, he enjoyed himself tremendously making the film because he got to play around with 3D, which was a new technology at the time. He discusses the technical points of like using the two cameras and having to get used to moving those around with one of them upside down so they could get that point of perspective or point of convergence or whatever for the 3D effect. They recreated a section of a desert road on a sound stage and everything and used miniatures to match it up with it, and it's just nuts. It's a good little article on what seems to be an awesome movie. I feel like maybe I saw a scene from it before. I know I've definitely seen the poster, which they also include as a bonus in this issue, and I think that's pretty sick. Once again, we get a cool little article with Jack Arnold talking about using technology that was new at the time in the 50s when he was making these movies that would be developed to crazy new levels by the time Fangoria is being published even. Now our next feature, while short, is an absolute fucking treat, and it's just a little tidbit saying basically what Alien did right, almost as a middle finger to David Cronenberg. And then they feature an awesome pull-out poster with a never-before-seen painting by some artist dude. It's just a cool little bonus, and I think that that's a really weird coincidence that this ended up in the friggin' issue where he tried to rip on Alien. If that's not a coincidence and that's intentional, that is fucking savage, Fangoria. Poster's really nice though. Like everyone that I've seen in Fangoria so far, I would proudly hang it on my wall. After that, we have a brief feature and an episode guide for Kolchak the Night Stalker, which was also one of our cover articles. It's a pretty good little introduction to it. If you've not seen the two telefilms that they did that led to the actual weekly series or whatever, then it's a good primer to get you right where you need to be to dig into those episodes. I actually not that long ago bought the complete set of Kolchak the Night Stalker, but I don't think it has those telefilms in it. I will definitely be searching those out. They go over some of the changes made from the telefilms to the actual series. They cover the dudes that did the stunts for it, one of which being the dude that played Jaws in the James Bond movie. And it's just an interesting little primer. Like I said, there's not a whole lot to it. They managed to get through it without really spoiling anything. It's just a nice little guide of how it went from being a novel that was being passed around to various producers to being TV movies to being a TV series. And at the end, they touch on how awesome it is the show still has such a strong following even years after it was taken from the air and after only being on for one season. It's a great show. If you've never fucked with Kolchak the Night Stalker, you definitely need to. You won't regret it. Solid Monster of the Week type shit. Our next feature is a pretty awesome interview with Stephen King where he talks about his thoughts on the upcoming adaptation of The Shining being done by Stanley Kubrick. He took a visit to the set on like the second to last day of filming or something and got somewhat of an impression. He also got to talk to Stanley Kubrick, who's being pretty tight-lipped about the details of production, but Stephen King was able to bring Fangoria a couple little tidbits about what was going on. It's also interesting to hear him talk about how he was skeptical as to which of his stories was going to eventually be, produced as miniseries or films, and he wasn't quite sure if the studios were taking some of them seriously. He even says that he was not quite sure if The Stand was ever going to get made into anything because it wasn't right for TV and it wasn't really right for movies or something. It's just interesting to see how a lot of that stuff turned out to be the opposite of what he thought at the time. I also really enjoy the tidbit where he talks about how he wanted George Romero to direct Salem's Lot, but because he refuses to work with the people at NBC, it couldn't happen. And, Stephen King couldn't blame him, I guess, because he's not crazy about those folks either. So by extension, he's not super stoked on the adaptation of Salem's Lot. It's a really fun little article. If you're a fan of Stephen King, you will thoroughly enjoy it. It's just really interesting, like I said, to see how things turned out so drastically different than how he was predicting at the time. It's also funny to see how stoked he is on the Kubrick version of The Shining when all of us know later on he was not very pleased with it. After that, we got the Fantastic Art segment featuring Michael Sullivan, who is the first guy featured that wasn't like an illustrator. He makes miniatures and models and props and things for movies and album covers and things like that. And it showcases some of his work, talks a bit about how he used to do some designs and graphic design shit for like National Lampoon magazine during the early issues. It's an interesting little detour from what has been established in the past couple of Fantastic Art segments. You might have thought they were just going to be like cover illustrators, but that's not at all the case, obviously. It's a nice little treat, and it's a good palate cleanser before the final article of the issue. Our final feature was a brief profile of Roald Dahl, I believe is how you say his name. You know, he wrote like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I believe James and the Giant Peach, bunch of classic children's literature, and a bunch of macabre tales for adults that I never actually knew about till now and will definitely be checking out. It's really more of like a hype piece for his upcoming series over in England called Tales of the Unexpected, where it's like half-hour episodes featuring some of his weird stories. He also addresses hilariously a group of librarians that protested some of the macabre shit and the violence in his books by saying, and I paraphrase here, "Silly bitches don't understand what children like. They like to see people bumped off in great detail, provided they're sufficiently wicked characters," or something to that effect. Definitely a great little piece to close out the article. As I said, it's got me intrigued to check out some of his adult fiction that he wrote, as I didn't even really know that that existed. And I'm actually pretty curious to check out this show and some of the episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents that apparently were based off of some of his stories. In the TV portion of our Monster Invasion segment this issue, we get a still from a new Raggedy Ann and Andy special that these guys that were also working on Duck Dodgers, I think, were doing. We also get a new update on the Duck Dodgers movie. We get it confirmed that the animated version of Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters was not going to happen, and we get a preview of 2 of 4 creatures to be featured in an upcoming stop-motion sequence for Jason of Star Command. As far as the rest of it goes, Elephant Man is the highlight of the movies. They went really light with it this issue for some reason. I don't know why. There's a book called Dragon World that they recommend, and that's about it. Unfortunately, the issue that was used for the scan that I have had the classified ads snipped out of it, which sucks because I imagine that means there was something cool on that page. Hopefully we'll have better luck next issue. Highlights for me would definitely be the Brood segment, of course, just because they actually showed her licking the fucking baby. The Jack Arnold stuff because it was just a treat. And the Stephen King interview, obviously. Low point would just be the fact that they skimped so fucking hard on Monster Invasion this issue. Hopefully they make up for that in issue 4. So until then, thanks for watching, guys.